I thought in the second half of the game this past week against the Commanders, that was the worst performance by their O-line of the season. They could not run the ball at all in the second half this past week. And that's very surprising.
You're tuned in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, guiding your gridiron journey, none other than your host, former NFL lineman, Ross Tucker.
Oh, yeah, it is. But it's not just any Ross Tucker Football Podcast. It is a teaching tutorial Thursday, which means class is in session with our guy, Greg Cosell from NFL Films University, the civilian GOAT, breaking down some of these big games starting tonight for the rest of the weekend. Yes, I will talk about the press box food in Pittsburgh yesterday on Christmas, as well as the two Christmas Day Netflix games a little bit later in the show. But we start, as we almost always do on a Thursday, with the man with the plan, Greg Cosell, getting his breakdowns of all the other big matchups coming up this weekend. Hopefully I'll remember to have a winner later on this week, tomorrow. Those of you that spread the word via social media, or go ahead and take advantage of any of our sponsors, or certainly those of you that rate and review the show or make a comment on YouTube. At any rate, it's time for Greg Cosell. It's Big Show time.
The Big Show.
All right, Greg, as we like to do, I like to start with the Thursday night game, and it's the Seahawks against the Bears. Seahawks are now in a position where they no longer control their own destiny after they had been playing so well for so long. And I guess the Bears are the Bears. I don't know how much you've watched Caleb recently, but just kind of your thoughts on anything that might jump out to you about tonight's game.
Well, I watch Caleb every week because, rookie quarterbacks I try to stay on top of. And I think there's been clear improvement in the way in which he has played. I would say he's still at the point where when he sees it clearly, which you can say, of course, with every quarterback, but young quarterbacks in particular, when he sees it clearly and the primary read is there and it's clean, he throws the ball really, really well. And he's on time and he looks really, really good throwing the ball. It's when it's not quite as clear. He's usually a beat late with his elimination or isolation. The processing is a beat slow. But the thing about him is when that happens, he doesn't force the ball. And that's one reason why he's not throwing interceptions, I guess, for 7 or 8 games now. But he certainly can make big-time throws, and we saw that last week. It'll be interesting against the Seahawks. The Seahawks defense is not a high percentage pressure defense normally. They don't blitz a lot relative to other teams in the league. They rely on their 4-man D-line pressure when they're in their sub-defenses. So this will be an interesting game. And this game's in Chicago, I believe, is it not?
It is, yes.
Yeah, so again, who knows what the weather situation will be? I certainly don't know that. But it's actually a very intriguing game because obviously with Caleb Williams, the Bears offense is very interesting to watch on a weekly basis.
No question. And Geno Smith continues to do some good things, even though they haven't been able to win the last couple of weeks. I'm really impressed. When I watch him, Greg, I'm pretty impressed. I'm so glad he's gotten this opportunity.
Me too. I think he plays the game smart. I think he's aggressive when he needs to be. And I think we lose sight of the fact, as some people do anyway, that he's a really good thrower of the football. He can make really difficult, tight window throws. Their run game's been very up and down, so he's had to deal with that. And he's had to deal with an offensive line that's had a revolving door at some positions. And it's just really not been as stout in pass pro as you'd like it to be.
Let's move on to the Saturday games, Greg, and let's start with the game I'll be calling 1 o'clock on Saturday for NFL Network. Really looking forward to that. It is Justin Herbert and the Chargers against Drake May and the Patriots with, I guess it's the Hunter Henry Bowl, since Hunter Henry used to play for Herbert, to play with Herbert. Now he plays with Drake May.
Well, you probably like the Chargers, Ross, because they play big people. They play a lot of two tight ends, at times three tight ends. They play Scott Matlock, who is essentially a fullback for them. He's really a defensive end. That's what he played in college, but he's essentially their fullback. We know in the Greg Roman scheme that he likes that kind of player. That's what Patrick Ricard was for him in Baltimore, still is right now, even under Todd Monken. So they play a lot out of base personnel, and they're very good with play action. Herbert has among the highest number of play action dropbacks in the NFL, and a significant number under center, so it's not shotgun play action. It's real play action, which is more difficult to defend because it takes longer to get to the mesh point. So there's a little more sense of conflict for second-level defenders who have the run and pass responsibility. They do a really good job attacking at the intermediate and vertical levels of play action. And it's interesting. We know Ladd McConkey's had a really nice rookie season, but one player who's really kind of jumped up the last 3-4 weeks in their pass game, not necessarily a volume receiver, but he's making catches every week, as a tight end named Stone Smart, who a lot of people probably aren't aware of, but he's almost like a big receiver. He moves really, really well, and they've been using him on intermediate and at times vertical routes, and he's kind of become a key piece in an offense that doesn't have, great wide receiver play.
It's so interesting that you say that because he jumped out to me. Now, I think he's listed as a tight end, Greg, but he's also listed at 6'4", 228. You know, I mean, he's listed at a pound heavier than A.J. Brown. I mean, he's basically, there are receivers that are bigger than him, which I think this is like an off-season discussion for us, but there are some guys that kind of, I don't know if you want to call him a hybrid or there's a blend. It's almost like you can call him a wide receiver if you want. You can call him a tight end if you want. It's really up to you.
Yeah, but he's, and it's funny you say that because he's a very smooth mover. I mean, obviously he's not a true wideout in the sense you think of the guys that are explosive, but for a tight end, when you watch him, he does look like a wide receiver in the manner in which he moves.
The other thing that jumps out, I'll probably say this during the game, man, I mean, Herbert really looks to McConkey a lot, which is great, but also, I don't know, to me that kind of says something about, guys like Quentin Johnston and Joshua Palmer that have been there for years. Yeah, I mean, that's just noteworthy to me, I guess.
Well, he's comfortable.
Herbert's looking for a rookie.
Yeah, he's comfortable throwing it to him. McConkey gets open. He did that in college, and that's his game. And as you've probably seen, because I know you've probably studied for the game, they run a lot of crossing type routes, and they're going to get a good amount of man from the Patriots, and the Patriots play a lot of single high. So there'll be opportunities in the pass game.
Yeah, I love, it's not only Matlock, they'll put Tucker Fisk in there, who's also like 6'4", 275. So even though they might be listed as tight ends or whatever they're listed at, they're very unique body types. You don't see many guys over 270. Matlock, I think, is listed at 295. Fisk, 275. I think it's cool. On the other side, Greg, I got to tell you, I really like Drake May, like a lot.
So do
I mean, he dirts the ball when the screen's not there. For all this talk about him being raw, inexperienced, he doesn't look like a rookie. When he makes the right play.
No, he does. He plays with a poise and a composure. Again, we can debate all this, but given the fact that they don't have a real good O-line, as you well know, they don't really have a number one receiver. You could argue maybe they don't even have a number two receiver. We'll see how all that plays out in the offseason. He's played really, really well. He's comfortable, he's poised, he's composed, he knows where to go with the football. I think he's played really, really well given the circumstances under which he's playing.
What about the game after that, which I think is a juicy one? It's the Broncos and the Bengals, Greg.
Yeah, the Bengals are always a really fun watch. And obviously they're way down the possibility of making the playoffs. A lot of things would have to happen. Obviously, they need to win their final two, beginning with this game. The question for them is always a little bit about protection. The left tackle situation's kind of up in the air for them, and they're playing against a team that rushes the quarterback well. Cooper and Benito are good edge rushers for Denver. Denver has a solid defense. Denver has some players on defense that are not really well known, but are really good players. Like, I think they have a pretty good safety tandem in P.J. Locke and Brandon Jones. And I think those are two players that are really important to their defense. Obviously not big names, but good players. I remember somebody on the staff of the Dolphins telling me maybe last year, when Brandon Jones started for Miami for a couple of years, how good a player he was. And you see that on tape with the Broncos. So this will be an intriguing game. The one thing we know, the question is, will Surtain match up to Chase? My guess is he will, maybe not every single snap. And don't forget, what we see more from the Bengals is moving Chase around. So he doesn't always line up on the outside as a number one receiver. He moves around. But I think when he lines up outside, I think you'll see the Surtain-Chase matchup.
You know what I think, Greg? Just two thoughts on that. One is, I think a guy following another guy around is a little more complicated than people realize, just for what it does to the other guys.
I'm glad you said that, because people just assume, put him on that guy. There's a lot of other guys on the defense.
Right, and the offense isn't just going to leave the guy there. So when they're moving him around, you're literally changing everybody's responsibility in real time as the guy motions, if you're going to have the one guy travel with him. I also think you're probably never, always doing the same thing every play is also not a good idea, because then Zach Taylor, if he knows Surtain is covering Chase no matter what, wherever they go, then you're just going to get man beaters all the time. And as good as Surtain is, you're going to put him in a really bad spot. You got to change it up a little bit, and especially a guy like Burrow, if he knows what you're doing, good luck.
No, I agree with you. That's why I don't think it'll happen all the time. That's why I said maybe when he lines up outside, you might see that, because Surtain would line up outside anyway. But I don't think he'll travel with him if he goes inside. I think if he, depending on the down distance situation in the game, I'm not sure he'd run with him in motion all the time. So we'll see how that plays out.
The nightcap on Saturday on NFL Network, it's the Arizona Cardinals at the Los Angeles Rams. I was a little disappointed in the way the Cardinals performed against the Panthers. And the Rams, Greg, you probably feel the same way, but the longer I do this, the more I think coaching really matters. And I think,
for sure. I've always felt that.
The Rams, the Packers, the Vikings are all terrific examples of that this year.
Well, it's really interesting, Ross. I'm not sure a lot of people would know that Kyren Williams has over 300 carries this year. And as we go into tonight's game and this weekend, there are 3 backs that have over 300 carries. There were no backs a year ago that had 300 carries, and it's more than likely there'll be 5. And this is an offense that really starts with the run game. And Williams is not an explosive back, so people don't really think about him a lot, because he's not going to break off long runs like a Barkley or a Derrick Henry. He's just a sustaining grinder. And he's really, really good at that. Zone is their foundation. Their offense, and I love Matthew Stafford on tape. I've always loved him on tape. I think he's a terrific quarterback, and has been for years. But their offense really starts with that run game. And they play a ton out of 11 personnel. So the question is now that Higbee is back, he was back last week, will there be any change in how they go about playing? Will you see more 12 personnel with 2 tight ends because Higbee is back, and he's a very good player? But their offense starts with Kyren Williams.
It's so interesting. You're right, because usually you would think, okay, Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua and Matthew Stafford. But that's another thing I think is fascinating about these guys, LaFleur and McVay. They're kind of known for, I think, what they do in the passing game, but they are clearly big, big believers in the running game.
I mean, Jacobs is going to get 300 carries too. He'd have it already if they didn't have a couple of blowout games. So he's another guy that's going to end up with 300 carries for Green Bay. So, yeah, the run game, it's kind of back in the league a little bit, and it's kind of hasn't been talked about a lot. But if you really follow the games closely, as I do, you see that the run game is definitely kind of made a return this year.
So a game I'm intrigued by is Carolina and Tampa Bay, Greg. They played a couple weeks ago. Tampa needs a win. They need Atlanta to lose. Any thoughts on the Bucs and the Panthers at this stage?
Well, the Bucs, obviously, I watch every week. The Panthers I haven't seen as much as some other teams. The Bucs, I find the Bucs kind of difficult to get a handle on, Ross. I mean, I think their offense, I think, is been very, very good. A lot of people might not be aware that they have a top 5-6 running game in the league this year. They run the ball really well. And, Irving's been sort of injured a little bit lately. He was back this past week in the Sunday night loss, kind of a surprising loss. It was an odd game for them because they got away from what they had been doing with the run game being a little more of a foundation. And I think that Baker ended up dropping back over 50 times. And he's had a very good season, but I don't think that's the way they truly want to play. They've had a lot of injuries on the defensive side. It doesn't really change what Todd Bowles does. Their two safeties, Whitehead and Winfield, have been out, but they still are a heavy blitz team. It's just they haven't, they've had some injuries at corner as well. They've had to move a lot of people around. They're one of those teams, as I said, I find very difficult to get a real handle on. I feel like they're a good team, but then they have some bad moments.
Well, let's talk about the team that beat them, the Dallas Cowboys, who've won 4 out of 5. They played the Eagles, who gave up 36 points. The Eagles' defense, which had clearly been the best since the bye, Greg, gave up 36 points. What did you see in particular from the Eagles' defense against Washington that the Cowboys might try to exploit?
Well, let's talk Cooper Rush if we could, because it's it's very interesting with backup quarterbacks the way they're very rarely talked about. And I think that it's funny you mentioned coaching. I think the Cowboys coaching staff, as Rush has gotten a little more comfortable playing, and he's not a high level talent, but he's your guy now. I think that they've started to do a really good job, the coaching staff that is. Different personnel groupings, their deployment of shifts and motions, their multiple formation looks. They give a defense a lot to deal with throughout a game. And Rush has been, more and more comfortable playing. I mean, I think if you can really get pressure on him, you can really pose a lot of problems because he falls away from throws when there's pressure. But keep in mind that this past game against the Bucs, Todd Bowles, who loves to blitz, Bowles went after him with 5 or more on 42% of Rush's dropbacks, and Rush was terrific against the blitz. Now, it's not just him, obviously, but he did a great job, as did the whole team, dealing with the pressure. He was 9 for 15 for 153 with no sacks against the Bucs' pressures. He's been very good on third down in recent weeks. I give the staff credit. I give Rush credit. He's throwing to guys that a lot of people might not even be aware of. Flournoy became a receiver this past week. So they've been pretty impressive, winning 4 out of 5. In some ways, it's a shame, given the way they're playing, that they've been eliminated.
What about the Eagles on the other side, Greg? What did you see from them?
I thought in the second half of the game this past week against the Commanders, that was the worst performance by their O-line of the season. They could not run the ball at all in the second half this past week. And that's very surprising because Barkley in the second half, that's when they've worn teams down. O-line has dominated. Barkley's been special. This week, Barkley had 16 for 27, Ross, in the second half. They could not run the football at all. And obviously playing with a backup quarterback, if they could have run the ball, they would have been able to put the game away, but they could not do that. And that kept the game together and allowed the Commanders to be in a position to win the game. The Commanders, look, sometimes you got to tip your hat. When the Terry McLaurin touchdown was an unbelievable play by both Daniels and McLaurin, sometimes that happens. But again, we also know that the Eagles had a couple of bad drops, which would have won the game for them, and we'd be having a different conversation.
Let's get to the game of the week, I think, in the NFL. It's the Packers at the Vikings. Vikings still battling for the number 1 overall seed in the NFC. They got the Packers this week and the Lions next week.
Yeah, we mentioned Josh Jacobs and the fact that the Packers really they run the ball really effectively. It's the foundation of what they do. And Love has really settled in. Are there moments where he's still a little reckless and undisciplined? Yes, but those are becoming fewer and far between. And he's really gifted throwing the football. You see that every week with the kinds of throws that he makes. Plus, he's willing to stay in the pocket and wait for things to develop. So they do have an intermediate and vertical passing game. They use a lot of motion. They're a difficult offense to play against. The tight end Kraft is really becoming a good player, and he's really important to what they do. The Vikings, obviously the Vikings defense is difficult to play against just tactically, but they do give up plays, but they also can make a lot of big plays. They sack the quarterback. They're just difficult because of all those pressure fronts that they show that you have to account for, but obviously they don't always rush or rarely rush 6 or 7. But you have to account for that, Ross. And as an O-lineman, how difficult that is. I mean, when you see 6, 7 guys on the ball, even though that 7 aren't coming, that's just a little bit of a mental burden right there. I would assume it just speeds up your thought process.
Yeah, why allow the offensive line to be comfortable and to not have to be thinking? I think that's the thought process. Let's make everybody have to be thinking, because some guys don't play as well when they're thinking. If you just line up in 4 down, look, if you have 4 stars on the D line, I get it. That's fair. But also, then the offensive line can be pretty comfortable with what they're going to get and how they're going to pick it up. If you're swapping out the look right before the snap, there are guys at any position that don't process as well as they should, right? That was a strength of mine as opposed to one-on-one pass pro. But there's some guys that are great one-on-one pass pro. They don't process that fast. So that becomes a problem.
The other factor that's rarely ever talked about with a lot of these 5, 6, 7-man front looks by the defense is it dictates protections. And by that I mean it forces an offense to keep a back in to protect and often a tight end. So what you're doing offensively is you're reducing the number of eligible receivers that are primary route runners. And no offensive coach wants to only have 3 primary route runners running routes. They want all 5 out in routes. I remember years and years ago, going back to the early 2000s, when Bill Belichick used to play the Colts, he would pressure not so much to affect Peyton Manning, but to make sure that Edgerrin James had to stay in and pass protect because he was such a good receiver and he did not want him releasing immediately into routes.
Makes perfect sense. Last game, Greg, the Sunday nighter, Commanders and the Falcons. We got our first look at Michael Penix Jr.
Yeah, and again, with young quarterbacks, Ross, what's so important with young quarterbacks is what the coaching staff does. Because, people forget that. You don't just throw a guy out there and all we do is evaluate the quarterback. You've got to evaluate what the offense does and how they treat him. And I thought the coaching staff for the Falcons did a phenomenal job. They played off their staple outside zone run game, which is the foundation of what they do with Bijan Robinson. They played off that beautifully with play action boot. They got Penix comfortable. They got him comfortable with one read type throws, and he throws a beautiful ball. So you could see early in the game how they wanted to get him settled into the game, get him comfortable, play off their strength in the run game, and you could just see him get comfortable as the game progressed.
Greg, you are fantastic. Love it every week. Thanks so much for the time, as always.
Thanks, Ross. Appreciate it.
This week only, West Shore is looking to reduce inventory. Makes sense, right? Last week of the year, they were already offering 25% off. Now it gets even better. If you schedule your appointment by New Year's Eve on Tuesday, they'll take an additional $2,000 off all shower and bath projects. Yep, you can still go to westshorehome.com/Ross and get the extra $1,000 off. So think about the deals you're stacking here. 25% off plus $2,000 plus $1,000. All you need to do is get a free no obligation quote by New Year's Eve. All you have to do is schedule it by New Year's Eve. So at some point over the next 4 days, if you've ever thought of doing a project, go to westshorehome.com/Ross and schedule a project or schedule a time to get the quote in case you end up doing it, that's an incredible deal. westshoreHome.com/Ross. We got an awesome week to drink some Smirnoff cocktails and enjoy football. How about Christmas Eve? Christmas, we got 2 games, including the game I'm calling. Thursday night, Saturday, Sunday. Guess what? Smirnoff and the NFL are with you every step of the way. Smirnoff is the world's #1 vodka. Plus, they are an official vodka partner of the NFL. This holiday season, when you're enjoying the game and your cocktails, please make sure to drink responsibly. Take a minute, make a plan, never drive impaired. Please drink responsibly. Smirnoff number 21 vodka, distilled from grain, 40% alcohol by volume. The Smirnoff Company, New York, New York. Please do not share with anyone under legal drinking age. Smirnoff, we do game days.
Tuck's Takes.
All right, Ross. So the Netflix games, they looked and sounded awesome, but the games themselves, they really weren't that competitive. What were your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm actually going to make it my Labatt Take of the Week, presented by Labatt Blue Light, the pristine Pilsner. Enjoy your beers together so you can live life to the power of we. Always enjoy responsibly. Beer, Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. I have a theory on these Christmas games. May or may not be true, but the home teams both got absolutely blown out. So let's think about this. You're the one having a home game for Christmas. That probably means your parents are coming to town to spend the holiday with you. Maybe not. Maybe they give you the weekend off and you go there Thursday, the day after the game. That's entirely possible. But for a lot of these guys, if you got the home game, your family's coming, maybe your siblings, maybe your in-laws. There's a lot to deal with. Do I think that's the reason why the Steelers and Texans got blown out? Absolutely not. Do I think it might be a small factor? Yeah, it might be if you're worried about everybody coming to town and all the logistics, everything going on around it. Whereas the away team, they don't have to worry about any of that. They hop on a plane Tuesday, they come, play the game Wednesday, they fly back. So that'll be something to keep an eye on as it relates to the home teams for Christmas games moving forward.
All right, Ross, so let's get into the games themselves. We'll start. The Chiefs, they lock in the 1 seed in the AFC with a 29-10 road win.
Wow. I was a little surprised by that one. That was obviously the game that I did. The food was excellent, by the way. Love the salad bar. Love the au gratin potatoes. Love both the grilled chicken breast, but especially the sliced turkey. Very nice effort from the Steelers. I'll go A-. I'll go A- for the Steelers. That was excellent. Chiefs totally dominated the first quarter. Got out to a 13-0 lead with the quick passing game. It was the fastest Mahomes has gotten the ball out of his hand all season long, and that is seemingly almost impossible to defend. The Steelers had killer missed opportunities, including Russell Wilson threw an interception after Darnell Washington got a holding penalty on a touchdown. Now, the Steelers did bounce back in the second quarter. They totally controlled the second quarter. They ended up having more total yards at halftime because they dominated the second quarter. But they were still down 13-7. And then I thought Russell Wilson, by the way, his running might have been the brightest spot for the Steelers on offense. But then the Chiefs got the ball to start the second half. And their first drive of the second half was just like their first drive of the game. Quick passing game, bing, bang, boom, touchdown. I have no idea how the Steelers dropped coverage on Travis Kelce a number of times in the second half, including for a touchdown. The play of the game was Trent McDuffie's forced fumble of Pat Freiermuth. That just ended the game. I think it was still a 2-score game, and then he gets that, and it was done. I got a lot of attention, I guess, on the broadcast and on social media. Mike Tomlin went for it on 4th and 20. But then the next series, 4th and 2, down 19 with 6 minutes left, he punted it. He punted the ball. I couldn't believe it. And then he punts the ball, which means you're giving up on the game. You're not really trying to win. And that's okay. Like, I can live with that. Why was Cam Hayward and Queen and Minka Fitzpatrick and TJ Watt still in the game? Why was Russell Wilson still in the game after that? You're obviously not trying to win, but you're going to take the chance of losing your most valuable players to injury and meaningless action? I was floored by that.
The other game, it was a near score gobby, but not actual one. Baltimore, they beat down the Texans with a 31-2 statement win.
Well, listen, this game was never really that competitive. The play of the game here was Joe Mixon got stoned on a 4th and 1 down near the goal line. The Texans went for it. They threw it to Mixon in the flat, and Washington did a great job tackling Mixon short of the touchdown. And then the Ravens went. It was 10-2 at that point. So the Ravens actually, or the Texans had a chance to tie the game. It was 10-2 at that point. But then after that, the Ravens went on a 99-yard touchdown drive. 2 incredible Lamar Jackson plays on that drive. And that just kind of broke the Texans' back. They were just like done after that. C.J. Stroud is still just off. Missing throws he absolutely should not miss. That would be highly concerning to me if I'm a Texans fan, because you didn't see that last year. Like, why is he off on some of these throws? Kudos to Lamar Jackson. I said on social media, at Ross Tucker NFL, I've never seen anyone quite like him. He was incredible. Absolutely deserves to be in the MVP conversation, and he broke Michael Vick's record, all-time rushing record, which was super impressive. Other than that, I think we're done here.
Thanks for tuning in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Make sure to also check out Even Money, Fantasy Feast, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network on Samsung TV Plus, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
Shout out myfrontpagestory.com. It's never too late to get a loved one a story that they will treasure and hold dear for the rest of their lives. myfrontpagestory.com. Backofficescheduler.com, HumanHeadNYC.com, Sporticulture, and Pizza Boy Brewing.